Wales changes fast, and in the cinematic road trip through Snowdonia, Cardiff, and Pembrokeshire, you'll see mountains, coastlines, and cities completely shift within the same drive. Throughout this journey, you'll see steep Snowdonia mountain roads, exposed summit hikes, Atlantic cliff paths, medieval castles, colorful harbor towns, Welsh pubs, coastal villages, dark sky valleys, packed Cardiff streets, and constantly changing landscapes unfolding across the entire country. What makes Wales feel unreal is how quickly everything changes. You can leave a cold mountain summit and reach turquoise coastline, medieval castles, or pastel harbor towns before the last landscape fully disappears behind you. You're cruising through quiet farmland, then the road snaps tight, stone walls box you in, and suddenly there's no space to breathe, no room to turn, just mountain pressing in on both sides. Entering Snowdonia by car feels immediate and slightly tense, especially if you're not used to Welsh roads, where lanes narrow without warning and stone walls sit inches from your mirrors, forcing you to slow down and read the terrain ahead as a sequence of decisions rather than a passive drive. Coming from the north through the Conway Valley, the shift begins subtly, with open farmland tightening into tree-lane stretches, then quickly escalates as the road starts to follow fast-moving rivers, their water churning over dark rock just below the guardrails. The air cools as elevation rises, and even in summer, you'll notice the temperature drop the moment the valley narrows. Betws y Coed appears almost suddenly, not as a grand entrance, but as a cluster of stone buildings, small bridges, and parked cars filling tight spaces, signaling a natural pause point for anyone heading deeper into the park. You step out and immediately hear water, constant, layered, coming from every direction, while the smell of damp wood and baked goods drifts out from cafes lining the main street. Inside places like Alpine Coffee Shop or Hangin' Pizzeria's neighboring cafes, you'll find trays of Welsh cakes stacked near the counter, served warm with a light crisp edge, and slices of Bannau Brycheiniog cut thick, spread with butter that melts into the dense, fruit-filled bread. People sit in hiking boots and waterproof jackets, maps unfolded across small tables, checking cloud cover through windows before deciding whether to push higher or stay low. Leaving the village, the road begins to climb without ceremony, tightening into bends that reveal more mountain with each turn, until Llyn Ogwen opens up beside you, flat and steel-colored, reflecting whatever sky is currently moving overhead. This is where cars line the roadside early in the day, doors opening and closing in quick succession as hikers prepare, pulling on layers, tightening laces, adjusting backpacks. The presence of Yr Wyddfa dominates without fully revealing itself, its upper slopes often hidden by cloud, leaving you to commit to a climb without seeing the endpoint. Starting on the pig track, the ascent begins almost immediately over uneven stone, the path cutting diagonally across the mountain with clear views back toward the lake shrinking with each step. The miner's track offers a slower start, skimming past smaller lakes where the water sits still enough to reflect the surrounding rock before turning upward more aggressively. Either route quickly shifts from casual walking to deliberate footing, where each step requires attention, especially when the ground becomes loose or wet. The wind strengthens as you gain height, coming in bursts that carry fine mist or sudden cold, and the soundscape reduces to boots on stone, wind pushing through gaps in the terrain, and occasional voices passing in the opposite direction. Midway up, the weather can change without warning, clouds dropping so low that cut visibility down to a narrow corridor of trail, forcing you to rely on markers and the movement of others ahead. Then, just as quickly, the cloud lifts, revealing sharp ridgelines and layered valleys stretching outward, with small lakes scattered below like dark glass. Near the summit, the path narrows and the incline sharpens, with sections where you feel the drop beside you, not extreme, but enough to demand focus. Reaching the top, you're met with a mix of energy rather than silence, hikers gathering around the summit marker, some celebrating, others immediately adding layers against the cold wind that hits harder at this elevation. On clearer days, the view extends across multiple landscapes at once, mountain ridges fading into flatter farmland, and beyond that, a thin line of coastline, making it clear how tightly packed Wales is geographically. For those not hiking, the Snowdon Mountain Railway offers a different perspective, starting from Llanberis and climbing steadily along a track that hugs the mountain's slope. Inside the carriage, the experience is slower but no less detailed, with large windows framing the shift from green lower slopes to exposed rock higher up. You watch hikers from above, moving along thin lines of trail, while the train passes through patches of cloud that briefly obscure everything before clearing again. The ascent allows you to notice textures, the way loose stone gathers in certain sections, the path's water cuts through the hillside, and the sudden contrast between sunlit patches and shadowed rock. At the summit, you step out into the same cold, wind-heavy environment as hikers, sharing the space briefly before descending. Coming down from the mountain, the physical intensity gives way to a more grounded experience centered around food and rest. Llanberis provides that transition, with small pubs and cafes positioned close to where routes end, making the shift from effort to recovery immediate. Inside places like Pete's Eats, long tables fill with hikers still in gear, ordering hot meals that arrive quickly, plates of lamb stew with thick gravy, chunks of bread on the side, or Welsh rarebit served bubbling over toasted bread rich with melted cheese and mustard. The atmosphere is warm, slightly chaotic, with conversations overlapping as people recount their routes or compare conditions higher up. Nearby bakeries offer simpler comforts, fresh bread, pastries, and more Welsh cakes often still warm, easy to eat standing outside while watching others arrive. Driving again in the late afternoon reveals a different version of Snowdonia, where the light shifts and pulls detail out of the landscape that wasn't visible earlier. Shadows stretch across valleys, highlighting the contours of the terrain, while lakes reflect sharper contrasts of sky and mountain. Waterfalls become more noticeable, especially after rain, appearing as thin white lines cutting down dark rock faces. Stops like Swallow Falls near Brecon Beacons draw you in with the sound before the view, water crashing over layered stone in multiple drops, creating a constant mist that cools the air around you. Standing near the edge, you feel the spray on your face and hear the volume of water overpower everything else, making it a physical experience rather than just a visual stop. As evening approaches, the pace across the park slows without needing direction. Roads empty and villages like Brecon Beacons settle into a quieter rhythm, with lights turning on inside stone buildings and fewer people moving between them. This is when smaller details stand out more clearly. Welsh language appearing on signs, conversations shifting between English and Welsh in pubs, and the sound of cutlery and low conversation replacing daytime noise. Sitting inside a local pub, you'll find a different atmosphere than midday, more relaxed with people lingering over drinks and meals rather than refueling quickly. Plates of locally sourced lamb, often slow cooked until tender, arrive alongside simple sides, while pints are poured steadily at the bar. Outside, the temperature drops quickly and the mountains fade into darker outlines, leaving the immediate environment, light, sound, warmth as the focus. Snowdonia at this hour feels less like a destination and more like a lived-in landscape, where the intensity of the day settles into something slower, grounded, and distinctly local.
You leave the mountains expecting it to ease, then the road rises, and without warning the land disappears, cliffs breaking open beside you as the Atlantic slams in with wind that hits instantly and doesn't let go. The drive into Pembrokeshire shifts the entire tone of the journey, replacing tight mountain passes with wider, rolling roads that move through farmland before abruptly meeting the coast, where the land stops and the Atlantic takes over. As you approach from inland, there's very little warning. Fields stretch out on either side, divided by low stone walls, and then the road rises slightly before revealing a hard edge of cliffs dropping straight into deep blue water. Parking areas appear near trailheads rather than built-up viewpoints, and the experience starts the moment you step out and feel the wind, constant and unfiltered, carrying the smell of salt and seaweed. The Pembrokeshire Coast path runs along these cliffs, a narrow, uneven trail cutting through grass and rock, sometimes widening into safer sections and sometimes narrowing enough that you instinctively step further from the edge. Walking here is less about distance and more about exposure, with every turn revealing a new formation, jagged rock stacks rising out of the water, small coves tucked between cliffs, and waves hitting the shoreline with a steady, repetitive force that you hear long before you see it. Moving south toward Barafundle Bay, the approach is intentionally indirect, requiring you to park near Stackpole and walk in rather than drive straight to the beach. The path begins inland, crossing open fields and low dunes before narrowing and rising slightly over a headland. You don't see the beach immediately. You hear the ocean first, then catch a partial glimpse of turquoise water through a gap in the cliffs, and finally the full view opens as you descend a set of stone steps. The sand is pale and clean, stretching in a wide curve between steep grass-topped cliffs that block out most signs of development. There are no shops or cafes directly on the beach, which changes how you experience it. You bring what you need, you stay longer, and you pay more attention to the environment around you. The water is cold even in warmer months, but clear enough to see your feet as you step in, and the waves are consistent, rolling in at a pace that makes swimming possible but never completely calm. People spread out naturally, leaving space between groups, with some walking the full length of the bay, while others sit against the cliffs, using them as shelter from the wind. Further along the coast, the landscape becomes more dramatic in shape rather than scale, with sections of the path cutting close to edges where the drop to the water below is immediate and uninterrupted. This is where boat tours become part of the experience, launching from small harbors like Tenby or St. David's and taking you out along the cliffs you've been walking above. From the water, the coastline looks sharper and more vertical, with caves carved into the rock and ledges where seabirds cluster in dense groups. Puffins appear during the right season, small and distinct with their bright beaks, often spotted on offshore islands like Skomer, while seals rest on lower rocks or swim close enough to the boat that you can track their movement just below the surface. The motion of the boat adds another layer, rising and falling with the swell, occasionally cutting through waves that send spray across the deck, making the experience physical rather than observational. St. David's offers a different pace, acting as a small but active hub where the coastline meets a compact city layout centered around its cathedral. Streets are narrow but more structured than the scattered villages along the coast, with places to stop that feel built into the rhythm of travel rather than incidental. After time on the cliffs or water, this is where you reset, stepping into cafes that serve hot food quickly but without rushing you out. Local menus lean heavily into seafood, often caught the same day. Plates of mussels in a light broth, fish and chips wrapped to take away and eat outside, or crab sandwiches served simply with bread and butter. Cawl appears in many places, a traditional Welsh soup made with lamb and vegetables, served hot and filling enough to counter the wind you've been in all day. Bakeries offer another pause point, with shelves of pastries and breads alongside more Welsh cakes, slightly different from those in the mountains, but still warm and easy to eat on the go. Driving between these coastal points, the roads feel less confined than in Snowdonia, but still require attention, especially as they narrow near villages or curve sharply along the edges of fields. You pass through small towns where houses sit close to the road, painted in lighter colors, with signs for local pubs appearing just before the center. These pubs anchor the late afternoon and evening experience, especially after a day outside. Inside, the atmosphere is shaped by the coast. People arrive in layers, wind-blown, sometimes still damp from sea spray, ordering pints of Welsh ale and settling into seats that fill quickly as the evening progresses. Menus focus on straightforward, filling food, fresh fish, often grilled or battered, served with chips or lamb dishes that reflect the surrounding farmland. The pace here is slower than in more tourist-heavy areas, with conversations stretching longer and the environment shifting gradually rather than abruptly. As the day moves towards evening, the coastline changes again, this time through light rather than weather. The sun drops lower, casting longer shadows across the cliffs and turning the water darker, with highlights where waves break closer to shore. Walking even a short section of the coast path at this time feels different, quieter, with fewer people and more space between encounters. The wind often remains, but the intensity softens slightly, making it easier to stand still and watch rather than move continuously. In places like Tenby, the town itself becomes part of the visual experience, with pastel-colored buildings facing the harbor and boats resting in the water at low tide, tilted slightly as the shoreline recedes. Dinner along the coast tends to stretch longer than planned, especially in smaller pubs where service follows the flow of the room rather than a strict schedule. You sit with a view of either the water or the street, depending on where you are, eating fresh seafood or another round of something warm, while outside the light continues to fade. The sound of the ocean doesn't disappear, even when you're not directly next to it. It carries through open doors, mixing with conversation and the occasional clink of glasses. By the time you step back outside, the temperature has dropped again, and the coastline that felt expansive during the day becomes more contained, defined by what you can hear and the limited light reflecting off the water.
You expect the coast to ease back in. Then the road tightens, buildings close in, and suddenly you're face to face with castle walls rising right beside traffic, the city hitting all at once with noise, movement, and no space to adjust. Arriving in Cardiff resets the rhythm immediately, replacing open landscapes with compact streets where everything happens at walking distance, and the shift from old stone to modern glass happens within a few blocks. You start near the city center almost by default, where Cardiff Castle sits directly against busy roads, its outer walls stretching long and solid while buses pass just meters away. Walking through the main gate pulls you out of traffic noise and into a contained green space where the contrast sharpens. The wide lawn opens in front of you, framed by thick stone walls, with the Norman keep rising on a small mound that you can climb for a higher view back over the city. The steps are steep and narrow, forcing you to slow down as you ascend, and from the top you see how tightly Cardiff is arranged, with the castle acting as a central anchor point. Back at ground level, the interior rooms add another layer, richly decorated, dimly lit, and detailed in a way that feels almost excessive compared to the simplicity of the exterior, making the visit feel like moving between two different environments within the same structure. Leaving the castle, the city pulls you into its covered arcades, which are easy to miss if you don't know where to look, but quickly become one of the most distinct parts of Cardiff's layout. These narrow, glass-roofed walkways cut between main streets, lined with independent shops, cafes, and small bakeries that feel separate from the larger retail chains outside. The light filters through the ceiling above, reflecting on tiled floors, and the sound shifts into something softer. Footsteps, low conversation, the occasional clink of cups from inside cafes. You move through places like Castle Arcade or Morgan Arcade without a fixed route, stopping when something catches your attention, whether it's a window display of handmade goods or a small counter serving fresh Welsh cakes, cooked on a flat griddle and handed over warm, lightly dusted with sugar. You eat them standing or walking, still hot, slightly crisp on the outside and soft in the center, as the flow of people moves steadily around you. Cardiff Market adds another layer of density, pulling everything indoors under a large Victorian structure where the noise level rises immediately, vendors calling out prices, conversations overlapping, and the sound of cooking coming from multiple directions. Walking through the aisles, you pass stalls selling fresh seafood, cuts of meat, baked goods, and prepared food, all packed tightly together. This is where you encounter more traditional Welsh flavors in a direct way, with counters offering cockles served in small containers, often eaten with a splash of vinegar, or laverbread, dark and dense, sometimes paired with bacon for a stronger, saltier contrast. The smell inside shifts constantly depending on where you are. Fried food from one stall, fresh bread from another, sweet pastries from a bakery further down. It's not a place you move through quickly. You slow down, scan options, and decide in real time what to try. From the market, the streets open slightly, guiding you towards larger shopping areas and then gradually pulling you outward towards Cardiff Bay. The transition isn't abrupt but noticeable, with buildings becoming more modern and spaced out, and the air carrying a faint hint of the water ahead. Cardiff Bay itself feels deliberately designed for walking, with wide paths running along the waterfront, open spaces between buildings, and a mix of restaurants and bars facing the water. The Wales Millennium Centre stands out immediately, its curved facade and bold lettering visible from a distance, acting as a focal point that draws people towards it.
Around the bay, the pace slows compared to the city center, with people sitting outside when weather allows, drinks on tables, watching boats move slowly across the water. Food here leans heavily into variety, but Welsh options remain easy to find, especially in restaurants that emphasize local sourcing. You'll see menus featuring fresh seafood, often simply prepared, alongside more familiar dishes, and bars serving Welsh beer that reflects the region's brewing scene. Sitting outside with a drink, you notice how the soundscape shifts again. Less traffic, more water movement, occasional music drifting from nearby venues. As evening approaches, the bay shifts into a different atmosphere, with lights reflecting off the water and more people arriving, filling outdoor seating and lining up at bars. Back towards the city center, the energy builds further, especially on nights when rugby matches or major events are happening at Principality Stadium. The stadium sits tightly within the city, and when crowds gather, the effect spreads outward through nearby streets, filling pubs and bars with people wearing team colors, voices rising collectively at key moments. Even if you're not attending a match, you feel it: chants, sudden cheers, the movement of groups heading in and out of venues. Pubs near the stadium become packed quickly, with lines at the bar and tables filling early, creating an environment that's loud but structured, with everyone focused on the same event. Live music venues and smaller bars offer a different version of Cardiff's nightlife, where the experience becomes more about the space itself. You step into places where bands play close to the audience, or where DJs shift the tone later in the evening, and the crowd changes from seated to standing as the night progresses. Drinks are ordered quickly, conversations happen in short bursts between songs, and the atmosphere builds in layers rather than all at once. Late-night food becomes part of the routine, with street vendors and takeaway spots staying open, serving everything from quick snacks to heavier meals that match the pace of the night. Walking back through the city late, the arcades are mostly closed to their gates down, but the main streets remain active, with taxis moving steadily and groups of people continuing between venues. The castle walls, lit from below, reappear as a quiet contrast to everything around them, standing unchanged while the rest of the city continues moving. Cardiff at this hour feels compressed but active, with multiple experiences layered into a small area: history, food, sport, and nightlife, all intersecting within a few minutes of walking, making the city feel dense in activity rather than size.
The city peaks. Then an hour later, it's just you, an empty road, and sheep standing where traffic used to be, with a sky so dark it doesn't look real. The transition out of Cardiff happens quickly, with dense streets giving way to wider roads that begin to climb almost immediately, pulling you into the Brecon Beacons, Bannau Brycheiniog, where the landscape opens instead of tightens, and the sense of space replaces everything the city compressed. Driving in, the roads stretch longer between turns, cutting through rolling green hills that feel softer than Snowdonia, but no less expansive, with sheep scattered across fields and often stepping directly onto the road without urgency. You slow down not just because of the terrain, but because there's no reason to rush. Visibility extends further, and the scenery unfolds gradually, rather than in sharp shifts. Small villages appear, spaced out, marked by clusters of stone houses, a single pub, and sometimes a local shop, each one feeling functional rather than built for tourism. The air feels different here. Less salt, less sharp wind, more stillness punctuated by occasional gusts that move through the grass, rather than across exposed rock. Approaching Pen y Fawn, the highest peak in southern Wales, the terrain begins to rise more noticeably, with the road leading toward a main car park that fills early on clear days. Stepping out, you're met with open space in every direction, rounded peaks rather than jagged edges, with paths visible from a distance as thin lines cutting upward. The climb starts gradually, a wide, stone-laid path that draws a consistent incline and line hikers upward. Unlike more rugged trails, this route feels accessible but still physical, with the gradient increasing enough to raise your breathing while allowing you to maintain a rhythm. As you gain elevation, the view behind you expands quickly, with the car park shrinking into a small patch and the surrounding hills layering outward in softer, rolling forms. The weather here shifts in subtler ways than Snowdonia, but remains just as influential. Clouds move across the sky in large formations, casting shadows that travel visibly over the hills, changing the color of the landscape from bright green to muted tones within minutes.
Wind builds as you approach the ridge, not in sudden bursts, but as a steady force that you lean into, carrying cooler air that contrasts with the effort of the climb. The final stretch towards the summit of Peñafon sharpens, with stone steps becoming more frequent and the path narrowing slightly as it follows the ridgeline. Reaching the top, you're not enclosed by peaks, but surrounded by open views in every direction, long, uninterrupted stretches of countryside, distant hills fading into the horizon, and a sense of elevation defined more by breadth than by steep drops. People gather at the summit marker, some resting briefly, others staying longer, sitting against the wind and taking in the scale of the landscape below. Descending from Peñafon feels quicker, but requires just as much attention, especially on the steeper sections where loose stones can shift underfoot. Back at the base, the focus shifts away from the climb and towards exploring the surrounding area where waterfalls offer a different kind of movement through the landscape. The Four Waterfalls walk near Ystrad draws you into a wooded environment where the path narrows and dips, crossing streams and weaving between trees before opening onto larger drops of water. Each waterfall has a distinct presence, some wide and heavy, others narrower but more forceful, with water hitting rock in a constant echoing rhythm. At Zgwdzid Ira, you can walk behind the waterfall itself, stepping onto a damp, uneven path that runs directly behind the falling water, where the sound becomes louder and more contained, and the air turns noticeably colder with fine mist settling on your skin. Driving through the park after hiking reveals another layer, where the roads stretch across open valleys with long sight lines, occasionally rising and falling in gentle waves that mirror the terrain. You pass farmhouses set back from the road, fields divided by low fences or stone walls, and clusters of sheep that move so slowly that require a full stop. There's a rhythm to this kind of driving that contrasts sharply with earlier parts of the journey, less reactive, more continuous, with fewer sudden changes but a stronger sense of distance covered. By late afternoon, the focus shifts towards small villages and countryside pubs, where the experience becomes more about slowing down and recovering from the day. Places like Brecon or smaller nearby settlements offer traditional inns with low ceilings, wooden beams, and interiors that feel built for warmth rather than style. You step inside and immediately feel the temperature difference, especially after time spent in wind or light rain, which is common enough here to feel expected rather than disruptive. Jackets come off, boots settle near the entrance, and the atmosphere encourages staying longer rather than moving on quickly. Food centers on straightforward, filling meals, plates of roast lamb served with potatoes and vegetables, rich gravies that match the cooler climate, and bread that arrives warm enough to feel intentional rather than routine. Cawl appears again, thicker here, often served in deeper bowls, providing something simple but substantial after hours outdoors. Drinks lean towards local ales, poured steadily and served without ceremony, becoming part of the slower pace rather than a focal point. Conversations stay low and steady, often between small groups, with the overall noise level never reaching what you experienced in Cardiff. By night approaches, one of the most distinct features of the Brecon Beacons becomes clear: the darkness. This area is known for its dark skies, and once you step away from village lights, the absence of artificial brightness reveals a sky filled with detail. You don't need equipment or planning. You simply look up and see more stars than expected, with the Milky Way visible under the right conditions as a faint, dense band stretching across the sky. Standing outside, the temperature drops further and the silence becomes more noticeable, broken only by distant sounds, wind moving across open land, or the occasional movement of animals. Returning to your accommodation, whether it's a small inn or a countryside stay, the final part of the experience feels contained and quiet. The contrast from earlier parts of the journey settles fully here. No traffic noise, no dense crowds, just a slower environment where the day's movement gives way to stillness. Inside, the warmth of the space, the weight of the food, and the quiet outside combine into a clear shift from exploration to rest, closing the day in a way that feels grounded in the landscape rather than separate from it.
After days of raw coastline, you turn a corner expecting more of the same, and instead drive into a hillside filled with pastel buildings, tiled domes, and palm trees facing a quiet Welsh estuary. The approach to Portmeirion feels controlled and deliberate, with the road narrowing through woodland before reaching a gated entrance that signals a shift from open landscape into a designed space.
You park outside the main village area and walk in, which immediately slows the pace, forcing you to enter on foot rather than pass through. The path slopes gently downward, and the first view opens partially. Brightly colored buildings appear through gaps in the trees, with curved balconies, arches, and terraces that contrast sharply with the stone and slate seen across the rest of Wales. As you step further in, the full layout reveals itself in layers rather than all at once, with structures arranged along the hillside, each one positioned to face the estuary below. The architecture pulls directly from Italian coastal styles, soft yellows, pinks, blues, paired with decorative details like columns, balustrades, and tiled roofs that reflect light differently depending on the angle of the sun. Walking through the village, the experience becomes less about moving from one attraction to another and more about following pathways that curve, rise, and double back, revealing new perspectives at short intervals. Narrow staircases lead upward between buildings, opening to terraces where you can look out across the water, while lower paths guide you closer to the estuary's edge. The sound environment shifts immediately. No traffic, no large crowds, just footsteps on stone, distant conversation, and the consistent presence of water moving slowly below. The estuary itself doesn't behave like the open coast. It feels contained, with shallow water stretching outward and changing color depending on light and tide, sometimes reflecting the sky in muted tones, other times exposing sandbanks that extend the visible shoreline. Gardens are woven throughout the village rather than separated from it, with carefully maintained greenery filling spaces between buildings and along pathways. You pass through shaded areas where trees create cooler pockets of air, then step back into open terraces where sunlight hits brightly colored walls, intensifying their tones. Flowers appear in controlled clusters, bright but not overwhelming, adding detail without distracting from the overall layout. Benches are placed at points where the view naturally holds your attention, encouraging you to stop without a need for reason beyond the setting itself. Photography becomes a constant activity here, not because of designated viewpoints, but because nearly every turn offers a composed scene. Arched windows framing water, staircases leading towards open sky, reflections shifting across surfaces as clouds pass overhead. You notice people pausing mid-walk, adjusting angles, waiting for light to change slightly before taking a photo, then moving on to the next position. The scale of the village allows this without crowding. Even when others are present, there's enough space to experience each area without interruption. Midway through the visit, the pace naturally shifts towards food, with small cafes positioned within the village offering places to sit without breaking the atmosphere. Outdoor seating areas face either the estuary or internal courtyards, and the menus lean towards light, straightforward options that match the slower rhythm. Tea becomes the default choice for many, served in simple sets alongside desserts that reflect both Welsh and broader European influences. You'll find slices of cake, pastries, and occasionally more traditional options like Bannau Brycheiniog, served warm enough to soften the butter spread across it. The act of sitting here extends time rather than marking a break, with conversations staying low and the environment remaining consistent around you. Continuing through the village, paths lead you further down towards the water where the terrain flattens slightly and the sound of the estuary becomes more prominent. The wind here is softer than along the open coast, filtered by the surrounding land, but still present enough to move through the trees and across the surface of the water. You could walk along the lower edges where the boundary between land and water shifts with the tide, revealing wet sand that reflects the buildings above in distorted shapes. This lower level offers a different perspective, looking back up at the village and seeing how the architecture steps upward in layers, each level connected but distinct. As the afternoon progresses, the light begins to change, softening the colors of the buildings and reducing contrast across the scene. Shadows lengthen across pathways, and fewer people move between areas, creating a quieter atmosphere that feels more private despite being a shared space. You find yourself moving more slowly without deciding to, stopping longer at viewpoints, sitting for extended periods, or retracing steps to see the same location under slightly different light. The absence of urgency becomes one of the defining parts of the experience, especially after the more physically demanding or weather-driven locations earlier in the journey. Late in the day, The cafes begin to wind down, and the overall activity in the village decreases further. Doors close quietly, and the remaining visitors spread out more, leaving certain paths temporarily empty. The sound of water becomes more noticeable again, along with occasional wind moving through the upper levels of the village. Looking out across the estuary, the scene simplifies. Fewer visual distractions, more emphasis on the horizon, the shifting tones of the water, and the structure of the buildings themselves. Walking back towards the exit, the path gradually leads you upward again, reversing the entrance experience, but with a different awareness of the layout. The same buildings appear in reverse order, but now with context, each one connected to the paths and views you've already moved through. As you reach the edge of the village and step back towards the parking area, the transition out feels as controlled as the entrance, with the designed environment giving way once again to the surrounding Welsh landscape. The shift is immediate but not jarring, leaving the experience contained and distinct, defined by its slower pace, layered viewpoints, and the steady presence of water and light throughout.
You leave an Italian-style village in Wales, then suddenly you're in thick fog. Sheep are standing in the road, and the mountain pass ahead looks way too narrow to be real. Wales builds its impact through contrast that never asks for long transitions, compressing entirely different environments into drives short enough that you feel the shift happen in real time. You leave a calm, ordered village like Portmeirion, and within a couple of hours you're back on roads that tighten, climb, and cut through open countryside, where sheep slow your progress and weather starts to dictate your next move. That same day can take you from the rounded peaks of the Brecon Beacons, where you walk steady stone paths up Pen Yfan, with wide views stretching across soft green hills, to the sharper terrain of Snowdonia, where the ground turns uneven, the wind hits harder, and the climb towards Yr Wyddfa demands more attention with each step. The difference isn't just visual, it's physical, changing how you walk, how you breathe, and how you pace yourself. Then the coastline resets everything again. In Pembrokeshire, the land doesn't rise, it drops, cutting into cliffs that force you to follow narrow paths above the water, with the Atlantic moving constantly below. You go from controlled footing on mountain trails to exposed edges where wind and distance shape every step, and then down again to beaches like Barafundle Bay, where the space opens, the sand flattens your movement, and the sound of waves replaces everything else. Within the same stretch of travel, you can climb, descend, and level out multiple times, each shift bringing a different kind of attention to your surroundings. Cardiff compresses all of that into a different kind of density, where instead of landscape changing, the environment layers itself. Castle walls beside traffic, quiet arcades opening off streets, and markets packed with food stalls just minutes from the waterfront. You move from stone corridors to open bay views, from daytime cafes serving Welsh cakes to nighttime pubs filled with noise from a rugby crowd, all within walking distance. The variation isn't spread out, it's stacked, forcing you to adjust just as quickly as you did in the mountains or along the coast. Food ties these shifts together in a way that makes each place feel grounded rather than just seen. You eat differently depending on where you are, not by plan, but by what's available and what fits the environment. Warm Welsh cakes in Bannau Brycheiniog and Betsy Coed after a cold start, something heavier like lamb or cowl after a long hike, fresh seafood along the coast where the smell of salt is still in the air, and quick market stops in Cardiff where everything is immediate and varied. Meals don't interrupt the movement, they reflect it, changing with the terrain and reinforcing where you are without needing explanation. What makes Wales feel larger than it is comes from how little time it takes to experience all of this. You don't spend hours waiting for a landscape to change. You watch it happen through your windshield, then step out and adjust instantly. Roads narrow or widen, weather rolls in or clears out, terrain shifts under your feet, and each environment replaces the last before it has time to settle into routine. The country doesn't stretch, it layers, stacking mountains, coastline, countryside, and city close enough that you experience them as a continuous sequence rather than separate destinations. Traveling through Wales feels less like covering distance and more like moving through a series of distinct conditions that keep resetting your expectations. You remember the physical details first, the resistance of wind on a ridge, the uneven stone under your boots, the sound of water hitting rock,
the warmth inside a pub after hours outside, because those are the moments that define each place more clearly than any landmark. What stays with you isn't one highlight, but the pace of change, how quickly one environment replaces another, and how each shift forces you to stay aware of where you are. Long after leaving, it's not one view or one stop that stands out. It's the accumulation of those rapid transitions, the sense that within a short stretch of travel, you experienced far more variation than expected, and that the only way to fully understand it was to keep moving through it.